I'm Mano, and I fit in pretty early on. Played bass from pretty much when we started jam, at the beginning, as far as I know, and up until we released Down to Hell, or thereabouts. Well, I remember meeting you guys down at the Dane Centre, which is now the Wick. Yeah. Yeah, I remember walking in and being pretty impressed with what was going on. I think at that stage, we still hadn't decided that we were a band. We were just sort of jamming to get that EP together. For me, it was a different thing to be doing and a pretty interesting thing to be doing. And Matt was really sort of doing stuff that I hadn't played with, on the drums that I hadn't worked with before. I think it was pretty interesting. So that was a big draw card. Plus the songs that you were writing were obviously not really what I'd been doing previously, but something that I was interested in being a part of. Well, from my memory of it, we weren't really impressed with what everyone else was doing sound-wise, or not unimpressed, but everybody was sounding very similar sound-wise. And we'd worked pretty hard on our live performance. By the time we'd started playing and become the band that we were, we'd put a lot of work into it, and it was something that people were commenting on, how tight we were, and I think we saw that as our strong suit at the time. So recording that was really, and capturing what we were doing was our focus, which we thought would set us aside from everyone else who was using very similar recording techniques and sounding very similar. That's how I remember. Yeah, that was our last show at the Art House, I think, wasn't it? That's how I remember it. I remember we had to get a lot of, there was a bit of extra work to get it done. It was good to play another show at the Art House, and it was good to capture that and to have it captured there, I think. Yeah, I remember being halfway through the set and not knowing what was coming next and getting Slick to turn around because he was wearing our long sleeve with the set list on the back, so that I knew which song was coming up. Because I think at that point we were sort of running without set lists. We should have known exactly what was coming one after the other, but may have had a few too many beforehand. And yeah, needed a quick prompt from Slick in the back of his t-shirt. Again, maybe a few too many beers beforehand, sort of playing it onwards. Gets a bit hazy, but I do remember the setup. I think we got down there and ran the set early so that we, set up and got the other desk and the recording gear ready to go. I remember it being a hot and sweaty night, but it all went to the Art House, so. Yeah, I suppose the main thing from my technique and playing point of view was that I thought, stuff this, I'm going to keep up with these two blokes playing guitar. And if they're doing triplets, then I'm going to do triplets. And if they're doing downstrokes, then I'm going to do downstrokes. And I probably could have toned that down a bit and been a better bass player from the perspective of where the bass player is meant to be. But I thought, no, stuff that. We from the beginning had a layered guitar sound, and we, I think, defined that and used that to its advantage to have those three very different sounds. And I suppose being the bass, my sound was to hold the bottom end up, but to get the definition that I was talking about in trying to keep up with the guitar, right hand, I had to bring the treble up in order to make it audible and to have that presence. So I think that all contributed to, say, my sound. But a lot of it was just, competition, I suppose. One thing I do remember is Rotting Christ, the end of Rotting Christ, there's those hits. And we got to a point where I wouldn't look at Matt because I knew what Matt was going to do. And we just get them every time, like absolutely perfect without looking at each other. And to go back to people's reactions, I remember people being pretty impressed by that, coming up afterwards just going, you guys are so tight. And I think that was an indication of how tight we really were. Like, we rehearsed those songs and knew those songs so well that we were playing them, in autopilot, basically. Even though we seemed to keep, we kept the sets very tight and together all the time. Some of the old guard sort of standing up and taking notice of what we were doing showed that we were doing something that, they were interested in, and a lot of people were also interested in. I think that was sort of one of the things that we began to realise too, that I think, you know, what we were doing was sort of relative to what a lot of people had grown up listening to and, you know, listened to all their lives as well. But we were doing that. We got a pretty broad audience out of that. I think just the numbers that we were getting down to the shows as well, and just, you know, the reaction, how happy we were making people, that was something that really stood out to me. I remember people being really stoked about what we were doing. They loved it. And I also remember we played at the Tote one night, and, you know, we had this seamless set where, you know, songs would just roll into the next song. There was tiny intros and, well, not tiny, but there were intros from one song to segues from one song to another and intros into bits. And someone coming up, I think me and you were standing at the front, and someone just came up and said, "Oh, nobody does that outside of stadium. It's amazing," you know, and just huge grins on people's faces. I remember I think it was one of the shows we played out at Hobbs's place with Hobbs, Angel of Death, and some guy came up to me and Luke and he just said that was top good. It was top good. I've never heard anyone refer to anything as top good before, but I've used it many times since. What I was saying before about it reminding people of why they got into heavy metal and metal in general, and I think a lot of what we were doing, although it was obviously unique and we were doing our own thing, it reminded them of stuff that, you know, they grew up listening to, and I think that really made a lot of people happy, you know. Which, I don't know, maybe you don't want to talk about how happy you make people when you're in a thrash band, but that's what I remember. People just being really stoked to see it and really happy.
Yeah.
You're putting me on the spot here. No, Serpent's Return has always been my favourite song. That was always the highlight of that album and that set while we were playing that set, and even when the set extended past what we were playing on live Til Death, it's always been my favourite, Serpent's Return. I think it still does what we were attempting and did do with it at the time. You know, we captured what we were doing, and I think because we did what we did, it will retain its, I don't know, it won't lose what it had. We didn't try to make it sound like the time that we recorded it. It wasn't what everybody was doing in the studio at that time. I think everybody else is going to sound dated because, you know, everyone was using the same amps and the same recording tricks and the same plugins, and we were using amps from 30 years ago and just miking them up and making them sound the way that we had them sounding at the time. Not to say that I don't think we sounded vintage, even though I know we were using old gear for a reason. I think it did what we wanted it to do, and I think it will continue to do, sound-wise. It didn't sound like it was recorded in 2011. Whether it sounded older or newer, I don't know, but it didn't sound like that, and I don't think it'll get dated like that either.
Now it's time to